Angela, and I'm joined with family law lawyers Rabab and Liberty, and we want to share our experiences as Black lawyers. So we just want to talk about various issues that come up in family law and some of the unique perspectives that we see dealing with our Black clients, and not just maybe I shouldn't be as specific as Black, probably our racialized clients, I should say. So I think I want to start off on the issues of parenting. So, Rabab, what kind of issues do you see that probably are a little bit more specific to Black families?
And so, with regard to Black families, I think we see a lot of very specific issues arising with biracial children. So, in the situation where one parent is, Black or a person of color, and the other person is white or another race, sometimes some issues do come up with communication styles in terms of how each of the parents speaks to the children, as well as discipline styles of like if the Black parent maybe is a little bit of a yeller, sometimes that can be considered in a negative light as opposed to a parent who's more like a gentle parent. And like, this is not to say that we don't have Black parents who are gentle parents. We're just saying that in some cases that I think all of us have worked in, there have been different communication styles and different discipline styles, and that has sometimes been an issue when dealing with parenting and how
There
the
might be
parenting
some
schedule.
bias built into this, Rabab, because I find that if the gentle parent happens to be the one that's not Black,
Yeah.
there's just almost that level of bias that's kind of at play there. Now, I don't know if it's real or if it's just the perception of the clients, but they do feel that way sometimes, right?
They absolutely do feel that way, just in terms of like, even how they're spoken to or how like opposing counsel sometimes positions things. So like, they feel a
Mhm.
certain way when, we get correspondence or we get court materials and things like that.
No, that's true. What I've also found on some files that I've worked on as well is I've found that the importance of parenting time. When I find that with a lot of Black immigrant families, the concept of family is just beyond the parents and the
Mom, dad, and
children,
children.
right?
Yeah.
So it's a lot of people. So when they're insisting on more parenting time, they're thinking, there's lots of cousins. There's a
Aunties,
lot of
uncles,
there's grandparents,
grandma.
and these people these relationships are very important, and they take time to foster, right? And the one parent wants to make sure they engage in that. I've also seen a scenario where the non and I'm just specifically thinking of a case where it was a Black father and a white mother, and the main concern for them was making sure that they got that exposure to their culture, right? Because let's face it, like, they're living in Canada, and they wanted to make sure that the child spent as much time with them to get that
Exposure to
exposure
their
to,
Black
yeah, to
side.
their, yes.
Yeah.
So, Liberty, is there anything you want to add on the parenting front, or have we covered most of what you would say you see on your files as well?
I think we have covered most of what I've seen on files as well. I would like to talk about traveling though, in
Okay.
these circumstances. So, there's sometimes like we have files where, one parent is from a different country, for example, Nigeria, Jamaica, or anywhere, India, and sometimes, the issue of traveling can come into play of one parent might not want to consent to allowing the other parent from one of these countries to visit the countries. It's an issue, right? It becomes an issue because for the parent who is from these countries, for example, I'm from Jamaica. So for Jamaicans, it's important that, we know our culture, we know where we're from. So as you can imagine, it's the same for that parent who wants to travel with their child or their children to those countries to, whether it's visit other family members, whether it's to experience the culture, just know where they're from, especially living in Canada, living in a Western country. It's important for the children to know that side of them. So these conversations do take place a lot, and they are ones to consider in these kinds of files because we can't just assume that, these countries are unsafe, or we can't just assume that,
Mhm.
oh, they just want to run away with the children. It's a really big factor for the children to understand that they come from two parents, and both parents have different upbringings, and we should definitely try to shine light on that it is appropriate and is important for the children to be able to travel to these countries. And also, sometimes there might be this underlying of, well, some countries might seem a little more dangerous than others. And truthfully,
Yeah.
just like Canada, I'm sure there's dangerous places in Canada.
No kidding. And
And there's
Toronto these days should be on some kind of list. Just saying.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I think it's something to consider when we say, well, maybe it's dangerous there, the children won't be safe. Like, we're for
Mhm.
a lot of files, for majority of files, we don't think it's the parents' intention to have the children injured or hurt or
In
not
an unsafe
feel
area,
safe
yeah.
when they're visiting these
Yeah.
countries. And remember, they're
Mhm.
from these countries, so they'll know where to go and where not to go, right?
Mhm.
And
True.
even if they haven't been there, they have family there, they have friends there that will keep the children safe. So I think traveling is a big thing we need to consider when it comes to racialized family law cases.
Absolutely. No, that's very well said. You hit it from all angles, right? Rabbi, why don't we talk about properties, like overseas properties, because that's something that also comes up a lot with in these kinds of
Yeah, no,
cases.
absolutely. And I think it's something that all of us have dealt with at one point or the other, where especially if our clients are either like first gen or second gen immigrants, maybe they have property back in wherever they're from, like, if they're from Nigeria, if they're from, Sudan or wherever, they have properties that are there in those countries. And now they're getting separated in Canada. So it's something we also have to take into consideration of, okay, so what are we doing with this house? What are we doing with this bank account? Then we have to talk about, conversion rates and things like that, valuations and things like that. When, the other side might think that the valuations are not necessarily like accurate or not up to a certain standard that they would like if the house was in Canada, or honestly even in the US or the UK or something. So it's quite a bit of an issue dealing with property and things like that for equalization and division of property purposes.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
have you run into clients that have thought that they don't even have to equalize the property because it's not in Canada?
Consistently, whatever. And like, it's now a question that I find myself asking my clients when I'm like, okay, we've talked about all the houses in Canada. What about, where you're originally from? Like, if you're originally from Ethiopia, for example, do you have any houses? And they're like, yeah, and why? Like, why is that important? And I'm like, oh no, it goes into your financial statement. And they're like, what do you
Yes,
mean? So yeah, that's definitely been an issue. Bank accounts
absolutely.
too, and like other things. So it's not just homes, there's also bank accounts and things like that are also very key. And then one part of our jobs is like, trying to find what the conversion rate was at the time to calculate it appropriately and things like that. And then depending on the country, sometimes there's a lot of fluctuation with
Mm,
conversion rates. So that's something we've had to deal with.
yeah. And sometimes
Exactly.
even making payments, right? From like when it relates to properties in these countries that we've encountered difficulty, right? Sometimes. So even that is maybe that's more of a consideration to consider of how we can make it better when people own properties in different countries, so that when,
Mhm.
payments need to be made, equalization's all sorted out, payments need to be made, etc. We don't encounter so many hurdles in terms
No,
of that.
but that's a great point you've raised there because the Ontario courts have jurisdiction over, they can make orders regarding properties in Canada, but not overseas. Now they can make an order regarding equalization, for example, but they can't make specific orders that that property in Jamaica be sold, as an example. So because of that, I think that's kind of where a lot of people get it confused. They're thinking, well, the court can't do anything about my property. No, they can order equalization, and you might have to make payments from assets that you own here. So the courts cannot probably put a lien on your house in Jamaica, but they can put a lien, against property that you own here. So that's definitely something. And if you have a property, and Liberty, you were saying this as well in terms of contributions and sending your share. Well, just because it's overseas doesn't mean it's gone. Like we would do the post-separation calculations based on like whatever the exchange rate is, and that could be a challenge for sure with some currencies. Okay, so Rabab, you told me something interesting you saw during the election. This is a bit of a contentious one, but we're gonna go there. So you said you saw something on Twitter, some things on Twitter during the US election. So say
So, I mean,
it.
Twitter is a very funny place, right? You see all kinds of opinions on certain things. So, I mean, something that I think I saw quite a bit of during the election. And again, this is not my personal thoughts. This is like, from what I saw on Twitter, it was about child support and about how
Yeah.
some certain people, some Black men, had stepped up and said that they didn't necessarily, like, one of the reasons why they would vote for, Kamala Harris would be if she got rid of child support. And
Mhm.
reading things like that was just like, funny to me because I mean like it's not anyway. It's just something that like I think a lot of people feel a certain way about not wanting to pay child support because they believe that it hinders them from growing wealth and things like that. But I mean, like child support,
Well,
it's
to be fair, Rabab, that was information you were getting from the States, right? So
yes,
I don't know what kind of regime they have happening over there, but in Canada, it's a bias proof system. So this is
it
one
is.
system that we can tell you is bias proof. So don't worry, we're not, at least it's one area where we don't have to think about how, your race might play into the mix because it's just the guidelines, right? So, I mean, Liberty, can you tell us a little bit how the child support guidelines work in Canada?
Yeah, so Angela's right. It's probably one of the most straightforward concepts in family law. We are really just going to take your income. We're going to look on the big chart that, the government has made. We're going to see how many children there are, and it's going to give you that number of how much you owed. It does not matter your race, where you come from. It doesn't matter. It really just matters your income, how many children you have, and what the child support guidelines say.
Yeah.
So
So that
like
is
Angela,
that is
yeah,
comforting. So you could vote for whoever you want in Canada without
exactly.
being concerned about how your wealth is being diminished because of child support payments, because it's strictly, as Liberty said, just the numbers.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Sometimes there are
exactly.
like a few considerations, but they're not like race based. So, for example, if you have a business and things like that will be taken into consideration. Or if you live in a different province or a different country, then
Yes.
adjustments can be made. But generally, it's just you look at your income, number of children, and it spits out the number. That's the number you have to pay in child support. Period. End of story.
Yes. And you've raised, that's an important consideration you've raised, Rabab, in terms of living in different countries and how that might play a part. Because if I have had a client that lived in Nigeria, and there were two concerns that came as a result of that, and it was very hard to explain to the court. And I think that's part of why he hired me as well, because he had been working with another lawyer. It was incomprehensible to them how hard it is to wire money to Canada. It was the fact that the fluctuations in the exchange rates looked like it was a lie. But it was only, and I wonder if I would have felt the same way if I weren't Nigerian myself. But I could understand how the exchange rates could go back and like up and down so quickly. And I also can relate to how hard it is to wire funds over to Canada. So that was something that we had to deal with. That was something I had to even tell the judge. I think I remember this was in front of Justice Share, and I had to be very like blunt with him. I'm like, I know what I'm telling you when I'm talking about this particular issue. So the support
Personal
needs to be paid.
experience.
Yeah. So this
Yeah.
is personal experience, and but you can imagine, if you had a room full of people that could not relate to something like this, like honestly, it just looked like my client was lying, right?
Mm,
And in terms of the
Wow.
exchange rates, that's built into the guidelines as well. So in some ways, the guidelines a little bit, designed to avoid some of these biases, but the amount of the exchange rate is also something that people like get to fight about. Thank God for, online tools and things like that. So if we're able to produce that, now I've never had to take that argument to a trial because obviously online articles are considered hearsay evidence. But for the most part, at motions and conferences, judges would accept what the exchange rates show online as being the case. So yeah, that's a good. I like that you mentioned, those concerns when people are living overseas. Now, there's people that work overseas that are not necessarily black or whatever. Your income would have to be exchanged, and we would have to make concessions. Now, something that I think, and this just applies to everyone that's generally living overseas as well, is looking at the quality of, I don't know if it's, would it be the quality of life or the income rates for those countries? So there are other considerations that we look into for people in general, but I find that for some of these racialized countries, there are specific challenges that they might be dealing with that, you know, we have to help them navigate as Black family law lawyers
Yeah.
ourselves, right?
Yeah. No, for
All
sure.
all right, guys. Is there anything else that we're missing? I know there's a lot we're missing, but is there anything we're willing to share? Was there anything else we're willing to share today? Or are we good?
I think
We're
we're
good.
good. Yeah,
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we're good.
So
Happy Black History Month.
Happy Black History.
yes, Black History Month.
Bye.
Bye.